My husband accused me of cheating with his brother. I left him, but the first 2 weeks after my son was born were a blur of sleepless nights, quiet moments with my newborn, and adjusting to the rhythm of being a new mom. Alex, my husband, wasn't around much. I chalked it up to the demands of his job and his own way of processing the immense change of becoming a parent. I never pushed too hard. I figured he needed time, just like I did. One quiet evening, the baby had finally drifted off to sleep. I tiptoed out of the nursery to find Alex sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. He barely acknowledged me when I entered the room. I perched on the armrest near him, trying to gauge his mood. "Everything okay?" I asked gently, hoping to draw him out. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, without looking up, he said, "I think we should do a paternity test." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My legs felt weak, and I sank onto the couch. "What?" I whispered, not sure I had heard him correctly. I need to be sure," he said, his tone unnervingly casual, as though he were discussing the weather. "Be sure of what, Alex?" My voice was rising now, anger and disbelief bubbling to the surface. "What are you even implying?" He sighed, setting his phone down. "It's not that I don't trust you, but you've always been close with Tom. Too close. I just want to clear up any doubts." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I was too stunned, too hurt. When I finally found my voice, it came out sharper than I intended. "Tom, you think I cheated on you with your brother?" "I didn't say that," he replied defensively. "You're overreacting." "No, Alex, I'm reacting exactly as anyone would if their husband accused them of sleeping with their brother-in-law." My voice cracked, and I felt hot tears sting my eyes. Where is this even coming from? Instead of answering, Alex stood up and walked away. His silence was deafening. It was in that moment, sitting on that couch, that I realized the man I thought I knew, the man I thought I loved, had allowed something to fester in his mind until it overshadowed everything else. The trust we had built over years was gone, replaced by suspicion and doubt. I stayed there for a long time after he left the room, staring at the empty space he had occupied. Somewhere in the house, our son cried softly, but I couldn't move. I felt as though my world had cracked open, and I had no idea how to put it back together. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination, but also dread. I couldn't let Alex's accusations sit. Whatever was happening to us, I needed answers. After feeding the baby, I found Alex in the kitchen, sipping his coffee as though nothing had happened. "Alex," I began, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. "We need to talk about what you said last night." He set his mug down, but didn't meet my eyes. "I already said everything I needed to say." "No, you didn't," I shot back. "You dropped a bombshell and then walked away. That's not how this works. If you think there's a problem in our marriage, you owe it to me and to yourself to talk about it." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Fine. What do you want me to say? You're close to Tom. Everyone sees it. I'm not crazy for wanting to know the truth." "Everyone?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Who exactly is everyone? Or is this just something you've made up in your head?" He finally looked at me, his expression a mix of defensiveness and something I couldn't quite place. "Fear? Guilt? It's not just me, okay? People have noticed things. The way you laugh at his jokes, how you two talk. Even during your pregnancy, he was around more than I was." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He was around because you weren't, Alex. You were so distant. I felt like I was doing this alone. Tom was just trying to support me, because you weren't." "See, there it is," he interrupted, pointing at me like he'd won some kind of argument. "You admit it. You leaned on him." "That's exactly what I'm talking about." "Of course I leaned on him," I snapped. "Because he's family. Because I thought I could trust both of you. Because you were too busy shutting me out." My voice cracked, and I took a shaky breath. "I never cheated on you, Alex. Not with Tom, not with anyone. The fact that you would even think that it says more about you than it does about me." Alex opened his mouth as if to respond, but then closed it again. His silence was louder than any accusation. "Do you know how humiliating this is?" I continued. "You're accusing me of the worst thing I could do to you, to us, and you don't even have a reason. Just paranoia. Is this what our marriage has come to? Is this who you've become?" Instead of answering, Alex crossed his arms, his gaze shifting to the floor. "If you have nothing to hide," he said quietly, "just take the test. Then we can put all of this behind us." I stared at him, stunned. "You think a test will fix this? Do you honestly believe that, Alex? Because if you do, you're more delusional than I thought." I didn't wait for his response. I turned and left the room, my heart pounding in my chest. As I climbed the stairs to check on the baby, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This wasn't about a test anymore. It wasn't even about trust. It was about the kind of person Alex had chosen to be, and whether I could keep living with him, knowing that. After our confrontation, the house felt unbearable. Every corner seemed to echo with Alex's accusations, his distrust, and the suffocating weight of his silence. I spent the rest of the day taking care of our son in the nursery, avoiding Alex as much as possible. By evening, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I called Alex's parents. His mom picked up on the second ring, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "Sweetheart, is everything okay?" "No," I admitted, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. "I need a place to stay, for me and the baby. Can we come to you?" There was a brief pause, and then she said firmly, "Of course. Come right over. We'll get everything ready." Packing was surreal. I grabbed what I could: diapers, baby clothes, formula, and just enough of my own things to get by for a few days. The whole time, I half expected Alex to come upstairs, to stop me, to say something, anything that would make me reconsider. But he didn't. As I zipped the baby's diaper bag, I heard his footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "Where are you going?" he asked, his tone calm, almost detached. "To your parents' house," I said simply. He raised an eyebrow. "Running away won't solve anything." "I'm not running away," I replied, lifting my son into my arms. "I'm giving myself space to think. Space you clearly don't want to give me here. Your parents offered me that, and I'm taking it." Alex didn't move or argue. He just stood there, watching as I carried our son past him and down the stairs. His silence followed me all the way out the door. When I arrived at Alex's parents' house, they were waiting at the door. His mom took the baby from me immediately, cooing softly as she ushered us inside. His dad gave me a tight, reassuring hug. "We're so sorry, dear," he said. "Whatever's going on, we'll do everything we can to help." They didn't ask for details that night, for which I was grateful. I was too exhausted to explain, too emotionally drained to relive the arguments. Instead, they set me up in the guest room, brought me tea, and told me to rest. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I felt a glimmer of relief. As I lay down with my son beside me, his tiny breaths filling the quiet room, I told myself I'd figure out the next steps tomorrow. But even as I closed my eyes, one thought kept circling in my mind. How had we gotten here? And was there any way back? The next morning, Alex's mother knocked softly on the guest room door. I was already awake, having spent most of the night rocking my son back to sleep whenever he stirred. "Come in," I called. She entered with a tray of breakfast, toast, eggs, and a steaming mug of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said gently. "Thank you," I replied, offering her a tired smile. She sat on the edge of the bed, her expression a mix of kindness and concern. "Do you want to talk about what's going on?" I hesitated, but there was no use keeping it to myself. If anyone deserved to know, it was her. She had always been more than just my mother-in-law. She was someone I could confide in. "Alex thinks the baby might not be his," I said quietly, my voice breaking on the last word. Her eyes widened in shock. "What? That's absurd." "That's what I thought too," I said, my voice trembling. "But he's convinced himself that Tom and I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. She shook her head, her face hardening with anger. "I don't believe this. How could he even think something like that? You've been nothing but loyal to him. And Tom? He'd never do anything to hurt his brother." "I don't know," I admitted, tears slipping down my cheeks. "He keeps saying he needs a paternity test to clear up any doubts. I can't believe he's doing this. I can't believe he's doubting me like this." Her jaw tightened, and she set her hand over mine. "Listen to me. This isn't your fault. None of it. Alex has always been a bit stubborn, But this is his insecurity talking, not reality. You and the baby are safe here, and we're going to sort this out. Her words were comforting, but they didn't erase the sting of Alex's betrayal. Later that day, Alex's father called a family meeting. I stayed upstairs with the baby, but I could hear raised voices coming from the living room. Have you lost your mind, Alex? His mother's voice rang out, sharp and furious. You're throwing away your marriage over some ridiculous, unfounded suspicion? I just need to know the truth. Alex shot back, his tone defensive. The truth is, your wife has done nothing but love and support you, his father interjected. And now you're treating her like a criminal? What's wrong with you, son? I'm not saying she's guilty, Alex argued. But if she has nothing to hide, what's the harm in taking the test? The harm, his mother retorted, her voice icy, is that you've already shown her you don't trust her. Do you think a test will magically fix that? Trust isn't something you can measure with a piece of paper, Alex. There was a long silence after that. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear more, but the conversation had quieted to murmurs. When Alex's parents came back upstairs, his mother's face was flushed with anger. He's being a fool, she said, her voice shaking. But don't you worry. We'll keep fighting for you and the baby. Whatever it takes. Her support meant everything to me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the gnawing fear that Alex's doubts had already done irreparable damage. The following day, Alex came to his parents' house unannounced. I was in the kitchen, rocking my son in his carrier, when I heard the sound of the front door opening and his familiar voice calling out, "Mom? Dad? Where are you?" Before I could retreat to the guest room, he appeared in the doorway. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tense. He looked at me, then at the baby, who gurgled softly in his sling. "We need to talk," he said, his tone firm. I tightened my grip on the carrier straps. "I don't think we have anything left to say, Alex." "Please," he said, his voice softening. "Just hear me out." I hesitated. A part of me wanted to shut him out completely, but another part, perhaps out of a lingering hope for the man I once loved, nodded reluctantly. We moved to the living room. He sat on the edge of the couch, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. I stayed standing, cradling our son. "I don't want to fight," he began. "I just want to fix this." I raised an eyebrow. "Fix it? Alex, you're the one who broke it in the first place." He flinched but pushed on. "I know, okay? I know I messed up, but the only way we can move forward, is if we take the test. Once we do, everything can go back to normal." His words hit me like a slap. "Normal? Do you really think things can go back to normal after everything you've said and done?" "Yes," he said quickly. "Once I know for sure, I can let it go." I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. "Do you even hear yourself, Alex? You're asking me to prove my innocence like I'm on trial. And for what? Your baseless fears? Your insecurities? Do you think I'm going to forget that you doubted me in the first place?" He stood up abruptly, his eyes blazing. "I don't have insecurities. I'm just trying to protect myself. You don't know what it's like having a brother who's always been the golden child. Everyone loves Tom. He's charming, he's successful. He's the one who introduced us, for God's sake. Can you honestly say there was never anything between you two? Never even a moment?" His outburst stunned me into silence. Finally, I managed to say, "You're right. I don't know what it's like to feel that way. But do you know what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do? To have your own husband, the father of your child, look at you like you're a liar?" He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, the anger in his eyes fading to something more fragile. "I love you," he said quietly. "I just need this one thing. Then we can start fresh." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "No, Alex. If you loved me, you'd trust me. But you don't. And I can't build a life with someone who doesn't trust me." For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but then he just nodded, defeated. "So, that's it then?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I guess it is." Without another word, Alex turned and left the house. As the door closed behind him, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I had made my choice. Now I just had to live with it. In the days that followed Alex's visit, I tried to focus on my son and the small routines that made up our new life at his parents' house. But every quiet moment was filled with the weight of what had happened. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in the guest room, Alex's mother knocked on the door. She stepped inside cautiously, holding her phone in her hand. "He wants to see you again," she said, her voice hesitant. I looked up sharply. "Why?" "He says he has something important to say. You sounded different this time. Please, for his sake, just hear him out." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to slam the door on the entire situation and leave Alex to wrestle with his doubts alone. But the hope in her eyes and the small flicker of unresolved feelings in my heart made me agree. That evening, Alex arrived just after dinner. His mother ushered him into the living room, where I was waiting with the baby asleep in my arms. Alex's father hung back in the kitchen, giving us space but staying within earshot. Alex sat down across from me, his hands fidgeting in his lap. He looked exhausted, as though he hadn't slept since the last time we spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice unsteady. I didn't respond. I just sat there, waiting. "I know I've hurt you," he continued, "and I know I've messed everything up. I let my fears get the best of me, and I lashed out at the one person I should have trusted most." "You're right about that," I said, my tone cool. He winced but nodded. "I've been talking to a counselor. Just started, but it's helped me realize how much of this comes from my own issues. My insecurities about Tom, my doubts about whether I'd be a good father. It all got twisted into this mess. I felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe, but I didn't let it soften my resolve." "And you thought accusing me of cheating would fix those insecurities?" He looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. "I don't have an excuse for that. I was wrong, completely wrong." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft, steady breathing of our son. "What do you want from me, Alex?" I finally asked. He looked up, his eyes searching mine. "I want to fix this. I want to fix us. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove I can change." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of possibility. "I don't know if that's enough," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Trust doesn't just come back overnight. And honestly, I don't even know if I want it to." Alex leaned forward, his face earnest. "I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, time, space, whatever you need. Just don't give up on us yet. Please." I looked down at my sleeping son, my heart aching with the enormity of the decision before me. Could I give Alex another chance? Or had too much damage already been done? "I need time to think," I said at last. Alex nodded, his expression a mixture of hope and despair. "Take all the time you need." As he left the house that night, I couldn't help but wonder if I was holding on to something that was already beyond repair, or if this was the first step toward rebuilding what we had lost. The days that followed Alex's visit felt like an emotional limbo. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final decision, just a slow, simmering uncertainty that lingered in every conversation and every moment I spent with Alex's parents. I had agreed to give him time to prove himself, but deep down, I was already beginning to wonder if it was a lost cause. I wanted to believe he could change, that he could take responsibility for what he'd done and rebuild the trust we'd lost. But with every day that passed, it became harder to imagine a future where we could both move past this. At night, after putting the baby down, I often found myself staring at the ceiling, my thoughts circling like a whirlpool. The man I'd married, the man I had once trusted with everything, had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him for that. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room with my son, there was a soft knock at the door. I stood up, not sure who it could be, but when I opened it, I was surprised to find Tom standing there. "Hey," he said, his voice tentative. "I wasn't sure if you were home. I thought I'd check in." I stepped aside to let him in, my mind already racing. Tom had been one of the few constants in my life over the years, but I hadn't seen him much since everything had blown up with Alex. "I'm glad you stopped by," I said, trying to sound casual as I gestured for him to sit down. "I could use the company." He sat down on the couch, glancing at the baby, who was contentedly playing in his toy chair. "Everything okay?" Tom asked, his eyes flicking to me with concern. I hesitated, then let out a long breath. "Not really. Do you want to talk about it?" I bit my lip, unsure of how much to say. I didn't want to drag him into my mess with Alex, but I couldn't deny that I needed someone to talk to. Alex came by the other night, I said finally. He said he's been seeing a counselor, trying to work on himself. He wants to fix things. Tom looked away, his jaw tightening, but he nodded. I don't know, maybe he can, but he's got a lot of work to do. Trust isn't something you can just fix with a few nice words. I laughed bitterly, nodding in agreement. That's exactly what I've been thinking. I just don't know if it's even worth trying anymore. I don't know if he's worth trying anymore. Tom shifted in his seat, his expression thoughtful. I can't tell you what to do, but I do know this. You deserve more than someone who doubts you. And you definitely deserve more than this whole mess with him and his insecurities. I swallowed hard, feeling tears prick my eyes. I just wanted a family, a real family. I never thought it would turn into this. Tom's face softened, and he reached out, his hand gently resting on mine. I know. You deserve better. And whatever happens with Alex, you're not alone in this. You got people who care about you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He was right. In the back of my mind, I always knew I wasn't alone, but it was a cold comfort when I had to face the truth. Alex wasn't the person I thought he was anymore. And maybe he never had been. That evening, after Tom left, I sat down and took a long look at my son, who was peacefully sleeping in his crib. I thought about the future, the one I'd imagined when I first found out I was pregnant, the one I had hoped for when Alex and I first got together. I realized that I couldn't continue to hold on to the past, no matter how much I wanted things to be different. Alex had made his choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. It had been 2 weeks since Alex's last visit, and the weight of the decision I had been avoiding was starting to suffocate me. I'd spent the days keeping busy with my son, trying to pretend I wasn't constantly haunted by the question, what now? Alex had kept his distance, giving me the space I'd asked for, but that only made the silence between us grow louder. His absence was more telling than any confrontation, and it only confirmed what I was already beginning to accept, that this wasn't something that could be fixed with time, therapy, or more promises. I sat in the quiet of the guest room one evening, staring at the baby monitor. My son was asleep, but I couldn't shake the restlessness gnawing at me. The life I thought I had with Alex, the future we had planned, felt like a broken mirror. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't piece it back together. I stood up abruptly, walking over to the window. The night outside was still, and the streetlights cast a soft glow on the pavement below. I had made up my mind. The indecision was killing me. I could no longer wait for Alex to change or for things to miraculously go back to how they were. They wouldn't. The next day, I asked Alex to meet me at his parents' house. I could feel the knot in my stomach as I dialed his number, but I forced myself to press forward. This conversation had to happen, no matter how hard it was. Hey, I said when he picked up, can you come over? I think it's time we talked. There was a slight hesitation on the other end, but then he agreed. Okay, I'll be there in an hour. When he arrived, I was already sitting in the living room, the baby peacefully asleep in the crib next to me. I didn't stand when he walked in. I didn't even look at him at first. Instead, I focused on my son, making sure he was comfortable. You wanted to talk? Alex said softly, his voice tentative. I nodded, but didn't speak immediately. I could hear the tremor in his voice, and it made something inside of me break. This wasn't easy for either of us, but it had to be done. The longer I waited, the harder it would get. Finally, I turned to him. I've been thinking a lot about everything, Alex. About the accusations, the distrust, everything. And I've made a decision. His eyes searched my face, looking for some sign of hope, some glimmer of the woman he once knew. But I couldn't offer him that. I can't keep doing this, I said, my voice steady, though it cracked at the end. I can't keep hoping you'll change. I can't live in this uncertainty, Alex. It's not healthy for me, and it's not healthy for our son. His face fell, the hope draining from his expression. What are you saying? You're not giving me a chance? I gave you a chance. I've given you weeks, months, really, if you count the way things were during my pregnancy. But it's never been enough. You don't trust me, and you never will. You doubted me at the worst possible moment, Alex. You made me feel like I wasn't even worthy of the benefit of the doubt, like I was some stranger you had to test. He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised my hand to stop him. I don't need an explanation anymore, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. I've heard everything you've said, and I've heard everything I need to know. The room was silent for a long time, the only sound the soft rustle of the baby's blanket as he shifted in his sleep. Alex was standing now, his face pale, his hands clenched in fists at his sides. I love you, he said quietly. I've always loved you. Don't you think we could work through this? I shook my head, feeling the tears threaten to break free, but I kept my voice firm. I can't love you like this, Alex. I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me, who thinks the worst of me. And you've proven to me that you think the worst. I can't live like that. Not anymore. I never meant to hurt you, he whispered, his voice breaking. I know you didn't mean to, but that doesn't change what's happened. Alex was quiet for a long moment, and I thought for a second that maybe, just maybe, he understood. But when he finally spoke, it was with a bitterness that chilled me. I don't know how you can walk away from this. From me, from everything we've built. I stood up slowly, walking over to the baby's crib and gently adjusting the blanket. I'm not walking away from everything, Alex. I'm walking towards something better, for me and for our son. You can't be part of that, not in the way you are now. Alex stood frozen for a long time, his face pale and unreadable. So, this is it, he asked quietly. I nodded, a finality settling over me. Yes, this is it. And just like that, with those words hanging in the air between us, I knew this chapter of my life was finally over. The days after that conversation felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't quite name. The finality of it all sank in slowly, and with each passing day, I became more certain that I had made the right choice. But that didn't make the reality any easier to bear. Alex left shortly after our talk, barely saying goodbye. I didn't stop him. There was nothing left to say. He was right about one thing. Our marriage had been built on trust, and once that was shattered, everything else came tumbling down. His parents reached out to me in the following days, offering support, checking in on me, but I could hear the disappointment in their voices. They loved their son, and while they had stood by me through everything, I knew they were grieving too. One afternoon, about a week after Alex left, I was sitting in the living room with my son, trying to focus on the book in my hands. I had learned how to balance a little reading and caring for him, small comforts in an otherwise uncertain world. The baby was playing on the floor, kicking his legs and reaching for his toys, and I felt a small measure of peace in that moment. But then the doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. My first instinct was to ignore it, but the second ring was louder, more insistent. With a sigh, I set the book aside and walked to the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Tom standing there. Hey, he said, his voice soft but steady. Can we talk? I didn't want to invite him in. I didn't want to open any more doors to complicated feelings, especially after everything with Alex. But I could see the concern in his eyes, and there was something in his presence that felt grounding. Sure, I said, stepping aside to let him in. What's going on? He sat down on the couch, looking at me before his gaze dropped to the baby, who was still playing nearby. There was an almost protective look in his eyes as he watched the little one. I've been thinking about you a lot, Tom said finally. I know things are messy and I know you've been through a lot. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I mean, really okay? I shrugged, trying to sound casual, though I was anything but. I'm managing. It's not easy, but it's getting better. Tom didn't look convinced. I'm glad to hear that, but I know it's not as simple as that. You've been through hell, and I want you to know that I'm here for you. If you need anything at all. I didn't know what to say. The comfort of his words was genuine, but they only added to the confusion I already felt. My heart was still tangled in knots from everything that had happened with Alex. I hadn't been prepared for Tom's offer of support to stir up so much. Thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice even. But I don't know what I need right now. I'm still figuring things out. I get that, he said. You don't have to have all the answers right away. But I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, okay? No matter what happens. There was a long silence between us, and for the first time, I really saw Tom. Not as my husband's brother, not as the friend I'd known for years, but as someone who genuinely cared for me. Someone who, in a different life, could have been something more. But that wasn't the life I was living. I didn't know if I ever could. I appreciate that, I said quietly, my heart heavy. I do. But I don't think I can think about anything like that right now. I've been burned too badly. Tom nodded, his expression understanding, though there was a shadow of disappointment behind his eyes. I get it. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone in this. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. I gave him a small, grateful smile, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. Thanks, Tom. I'll keep that in mind. As he left, I stood at the door, watching him walk down the driveway. A part of me wondered if I'd ever be able to move on from the mess of my marriage, from the tangled web of feelings surrounding Alex and Tom. But for now, all I could focus on was my son. He was the only thing that truly mattered. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild something for myself, even if it wasn't the life I'd once envisioned. The days after Alex's accusation were suffocating. I was stuck in a spiral, not sure where to go next. I kept thinking, how could he think that? But every day, it got harder to ignore the truth. He didn't trust me. He couldn't even look at our son without doubt. One night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Why are you doing this? I confronted him. You've been distant, avoiding me during the pregnancy, and now you're not even interested in your son. What's going on? Alex hesitated, then finally spoke, his words cold and calculated. I think the baby might be Tom's. My chest tightened. What? I couldn't believe it. Are you serious? After all these years, you're doubting me like this? You're overreacting, Alex said, his voice flat. This just confirms what I've been thinking. I could barely process his words. It felt like everything I knew about our relationship shattered in that moment. This wasn't just about a baby. It was about his distrust, his refusal to see the truth. Without another word, I grabbed my son and left. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I had no plan, no idea where I was going, but I couldn't stay. I ended up at Alex's parents' house. They welcomed me in, apologized for their son's behavior, and promised they'd talk to him. But even they couldn't make him change his mind. Alex insisted on the paternity test, and that's when I realized our marriage was broken beyond repair. When I filed for divorce, Alex accused me of manipulating the situation, thinking I was trying to hand their family business over to Tom. I was stunned by his paranoia. Are you really willing to destroy everything over this? I asked him, frustrated. Don't you see how offensive this is? If you have nothing to hide, do the test, he repeated, his voice hard. That was it. I saw the truth. If Alex couldn't trust me after everything we'd been through, then he wasn't ready to be a husband or a father. And so, I made my decision. There was no turning back now. The divorce process was harder than I expected, but I knew it was the right choice. Alex's parents supported me through every step, helping with legal advice, and even encouraging me to stay with them until everything was finalized. They apologized for Alex's behavior, but their words couldn't undo the damage. One day, Alex called. I'm sorry for everything, for what I put you through, he said, his voice low. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to respond. The hurt was still fresh, and his apology felt too little, too late. I don't know if you understand what you've done, I replied. You broke everything we had with your doubts. I was scared, he admitted. I thought I could fix it by questioning everything. But now I see it's too late. Yeah, I said quietly. It is. The conversation ended there. The finality of it hit me, but I couldn't bring myself to feel regret. Alex had made his choice. He chose distrust over us. With every passing day, I felt more certain of my decision. I wasn't just walking away from a marriage. I was reclaiming my life. And for my son, I'd keep moving forward. After the divorce, I focused on finding my footing. Each day was a little easier. I spent time with my son, taking small steps toward rebuilding. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as overwhelming as before. I joined a support group for single mothers. At first, it felt awkward, but soon, I found comfort in the shared experiences. Hearing other women's stories made me realize I wasn't alone. One afternoon, Alex's mom called. She apologized again and said Alex regretted everything, but I knew there was no going back. I can't change what's happened, I told her. I have to focus on my son now. It was the closure I needed. My son's smile was all the motivation I needed to keep moving forward. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I had to build a life for him, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful.